Everything up and running. Let us continue. Next Sheila. Mi nikra ani lekabel tzedakah. Who qualifies as an ani? What, in other words, an ani is the person who is the recipient of tzedakah. What qualifies an individual? So, as we've learned all along, yesh omrim shemishi yesh lo reish zuz. There are those who say, this is just straight out of the Shulchan Aruch, that if someone has 200 zuz, hainu sikum shemaspik l'shana l'mizonos l'ksus l'dira yatsa michlal ani. That is to say, 200 zuz is the amount described by the Gemara that a person has in order to live out a full year with rent, or covering his living expenses, food, clothing, and a roof. Okay? You don't have the status of an ani if you have that amount of money to your name. V'yesh omrim, but there's another opinion. She'ein lanu bizmanenu shi'ur l'shana shebo yatsa michlal ani. That doesn't apply anymore. There's opinion that doesn't apply anymore. V'ayin hatam b'vurim, we'll see in the reason why in the commentary. V'rak mi sheyesh lo keren shenosei v'notein ba u'marviach ba b'kivius k'dei parnasas yatsa michlal ani. Only a person who has so much principal in their assets that they can use it to generate income, okay, is no longer an ani. But if a person cannot generate income from their current wealth, from their current whatever they have, and they have to spend it for living expenses, even if they have theoretically enough to live out the year, they still would qualify as an ani. And it goes, and it should be assumed, it should be understood that if someone is earning a salary that provides him for all of his needs, he's also no longer considered an ani. So a person may have no money in the bank. There are many people who live from paycheck to paycheck. But as long as that paycheck covers his living expenses, he does not qualify as an ani. A person can't say, well, I only have a couple of $100 in my account, and I'm getting a regular paycheck, but I feel insecure. I'd like to start accumulating wealth, and therefore I'd like to start accepting tzedakah. That's not a legitimate argument. Now, what we need to do is we need to really look at the commentaries and see like why things have changed over the centuries. Why it is that it used to be that you only qualify as an ani so long as you don't have enough money to last you the year. And now that's changed. So he writes, Hinei betur kasav zelushana. So he quotes the Torah as stating as follows. Now, the Torah is a Rishon. It's from the 14th century. And he says, V'yesh omrim, shekol elu hashiurim lo nemru ela biyamehem. That all of these measurements that are cited by the Shulchan Aruch as far as what qualifies as an ani, how much an ani is allowed to take, etc., only applies in the times of the Gemara. Shahaya lahem kupa v'tamchoy. There were two systems of tzedakah. One was called the kupa, and one was called the tamchoy. The kupa was a daily cash distribution, and the tamchoy was a weekly food distribution. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the distinction. V'hayu mechalkin ma'aser ani b'chol shana, and also private balabatim would distribute meiser ani every year. This was in Eretz Yisrael. And they also would leave these gleanings for the poor. And it's for that reason that the system was so efficient, because there were so many distributions made for the poor, and there was a greater sense of wealth within the Jewish community, Lefichach shi'aru shemi sheyesh lo reish zuz lo yitol. And therefore, the rabbi said that anyone who has 200 zuz in their possession may not take from these charities. Because this year at least he can subsist on what he has. And next year we'll see what happens. But nowadays, where we don't have such a structured tzedakah system, then it would be permissible, says the Torah, to go to the tzedakah and take as much money as you need in order to generate income from that money, which sounds crazy, right? It sounds crazy. In other words, I can go to the tzedakah according to what he's writing and say, I need $100,000 from tzedakah because I need to use that principle to generate income by investing it. And once I have 100 grand, I can open up my business and I can start generating income. He says, and the proof, argues the Torah, is that if a person is already engaged in business activity, then even if he only has 50 zuz, right? Even if he only has a few zuz, he's not allowed to take tzedakah money. In other words, if a person is gainfully employed in doing something that earns him income, he's not allowed to take any tzedakah, regardless of how much or how little money he has to his name. Because a person would be can easily earn income from whatever he's doing. Alma hakola fi ha'inyan, and therefore you see that it goes according to the circumstance, and you can't use this criterion of 200 zuz anymore. Ve'efshar ki biyameim haita ha'hotza'am me'uta, ve'efshar lihitparnes berevach shel nun zuz. He says it could be because expenses were very little. A person, all he needed to his name was 200 zuz, and he would be able to generate income from 200 zuz. And that's why the rabbis use that amount. Aval ha'idna I efshar, v'hakol fi hamakom v'hasha ad kan l'shana. But nowadays it doesn't work that way. You cannot generate income from 200 zuz. And therefore, everything depends upon the circumstance, the time, and the place. Umakoro mehasmak, the source of this Torah, is from the Smak, who's an earlier Rishon. And so if we wanted to translate this, he says, Dahainu, Masha kavu chachamim bizmanim shemi sheyesh lo reish zuz yatsa michlal ani, umishum shebesikum zeh hayochol lichyo shana shalema, ulashana haba im lo yiyalo, az yuchal lihitparnes me hakupa. He says, the thinking was, when the rabbis in the times of the Gemara assigned the amount of 200 zuz, they said, that's what you need to live out the year and exhaust those funds, and then we'll see where you're holding next year. And if next year you don't have enough money, then you can take from all of these, from the kuppah, the tamchui, the leket, the shichacha, the peah, all of the different charity sources that were structured within the Jewish community. That's right. Well, I guess there has to be a marker, because they used to do distributions. They used to do a once a year distribution of Meiser Ani. It could be that it was either from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah or from Rosh Chodesh Nisan to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I don't know for sure. But I guess that would be we look at it at one point in the year for every person. Ulam bizmanenu im lo yelo az lo yuchal lihitparnes mehakub peya. He says, but in our times, where we don't have these structured charity sources. And therefore, even if a person has 200 zuz, so he has enough to live out 200 for the year with his savings, but he doesn't have a way of generating income. In other words, a person may have, let's say what would you say it costs today if you were to whittle down to the bare essentials for a couple to survive for a year? Maybe $30,000. I don't know. I don't just is it around? Yeah. Is it really? So maybe that would be the amount that you need to live out a year. But what if a guy comes to us and he says, listen, my business went belly up. I need to start another business, and I would like to collect tzedakah from the community in order to be able to purchase another business and do another startup. I want to open up another restaurant, or well, I'm not sure the restaurant business is a good investment these days. You never know. Listen, some of them do quite well. It all depends on the business model. Or I want to sell widgets, and I need to I need to purchase a certain amount of inventory. I need to put up some money for the realtor who's going to be leasing the office space for me, and so I'm going to need $100,000 from the community. So it sounds like what he's saying is that you still qualify as an ani if you cannot generate income from the little that you do have. Umasha kasav hatur sheyachol litol ad sheyilo keren kedei lihitparnes min harevach dainu sikum shenosei v'notein bo umarviach bo b'kevius kedei parnasasa. He says the Torah says until you have enough money that you can use that money to start generating income. If you don't have that much, you still qualify as an ani, even if it's more than what you would need, even if it's more than the 30,000 that you would need to live out the year. Okay. It's good. No, with that's not what we're saying.
Unless you have the money to invest, so you
right. But we're talking about a person who currently is not earning a paycheck. His business went out. He went out of business, and now he's got $30,000 to his name, and he wants to know if he qualifies as someone who can start going to the community to ask for charity. Yeah. Now, he could also say, I'd like to borrow the money, right? That would be a person would have to take out a small business loan. But what if he doesn't have credit? What if the circumstances are such that he says, I don't have the wherewithal to get a business loan, right? I mean, obviously that would be the best thing for him to do. But what we're saying here is that tzedakah is such that if a person asks for this handout, and he's entitled to it, then we should give him. So apparently, according to this opinion in the Torah, if he cannot generate income from the current amount that he has, he does qualify as an ani. But we haven't talked about with whether he's getting, we're assuming he's not currently generating income. He quotes now Chasam Sofer, saying something similar. He says, "V'hinei b'sma kosav shedin mi sheyesh lo matayim zuz eno noeg b'yameinu." He quotes the smag as saying that this amount of 200 zuz, which is the amount that you needed in the times of the Gemara to live out a year, does not apply today. Umevio beis Yosef erotz lomar debiyameim shayel amleket shich chopeya hayu misparnasim mishana l'shana. He says it's because in their days there were agricultural tithes, and every year they would assess that a person would come to collect from the agricultural tithes. And so he would have to look and see, what do I have? Do I have enough to last me the year? without taking the tithe. Aval ata ma gavul titein lo v'chulei. He says, but today, since we don't have those structured tithes, we don't have those structured charity systems, you say, Ela hakol lefi hazman shelo keren kedei sheyochol lisparnes min harevach ad kamoshan. He says, today, he's just reiterating the smak who says that you need enough cash to generate income from. The nira kehanal shadavka bismaneim shahayu leket shechol peim mishaylo sikum kesef kedei lichu shana shlema yatsa michlal ani aval bismaneinu lo. Okay, just really reiterating. Va'od b'masha kasav aval ata magavul titen lo mashma shelo bora lahalacha bismaneinu mahu ashir shebo nikra ani. The fact that he writes the statement, but nowadays, what kind of parameters can you apply? Seems like he's saying that today it's much more difficult to ascertain who is considered to be an ani. Al kol panim misha ein lo sikum sheyachol lichyo mimena shana echas nichnas begeder ani. But certainly, someone who doesn't have enough money to live out the year would apply as an ani. But then he writes ulam b'mordechai kasav v'zelashona. But then he quotes from the Mordechai, and the Mordechai writes as follows: Rabbeinu Yehuda hayam mesupak adam shehu nodeid lemer chakim lahavi teref leveso. He says, if a person is an itinerant businessman, v'nastu lo masayim zuz be'ir echas, and they give you 200 zuz, you collect 200. A guy goes and collects tzedakah from town to town. He gets 200 zuz from one place. Does he now have to abort his trip and come home? Im tzorach lachzu lebesu lahotziim, hol v'yesh lo kfar masayim, ve'eno rashai litol yoser, ulachar kalos shana shuv yarchik nedod ad she'ilo masayim v'pein yachzor chalila ad kam shona. He says the Mordechai suggests that if a person is a traveling schnorrer, I guess it's for lack of a better term, he goes from city to city to collect tzedakah. So as soon as you accumulate 200 zuz, maybe you have to cut the trip short and go back home. And then once you've exhausted the 200 zuz, go back out on the road again. So it sounds like the Mordechai was applying the parameters of the Gemara. Okay, let us continue. Let's see what his bottom line is, because we could go on for a long time, because he's really just quoting the sources. So he says, "Umimasha kasav shelo nemer hashirim halalu elo biyamehem, mashma sheshnei hashirim shel reshus v'shel chamishim zuz hishtanu." He says that those measurements of 200 zuz and of 50 zuz, which was the amount that the Torah had said that even if you have 50 zuz, but you're earning an income, you don't have a right to take from tzedakah. But those measurements have changed. Va'od mimasha kasav keren kedei she'isparnes meharevach, mashma shirak b'shir zeh yatsa michlal ani. He says the only time that you no longer qualify as an ani is if you have enough money to generate income from that money. וממילא יש להסתפק האם השיר הזה דקרן כדי שיספרנס מהרווח הוא על העיקרון ד50 זוז, היינו סיכום שנוסע ונוסעים בו ומרוויח בו בקביעס כדי פרנסתו, או דילמה הוא על העיקרון דריש זוז, היינו סיכום שאינו נוסע ונוסעים בו. He says it's really, still remains an ambiguity, because are we suggesting that all you need is a small amount to generate income, or is he saying that you need to be able to have a larger amount of money in order to be able to generate income? And v'lachein yoter mistaver lahasbir dekeren kedei she'itparnes meharevach hu ala ikaron de50 zuz. Haynu sikum shenosev v'nosim bo marviach bo bekvias kedei parnasasa. He says it makes more sense to say that all you need is a small amount of money to generate income. That's the point of the Torah. Mela tzarech lomer shelagabi mi she'enu nosev v'nosim lo borer lahalacha bizmanenu mahu hashir shebo nikra ani k'mo shekosavni la'el. Rak shebar lanu shmi she'en lo sikum sheyachol licha mimenu shana echas nichnas begeder ani. So basically, he's saying like this: if you're not generating income, then you use the criterion of how much do you have to live how much time do you have from your savings before you exhaust your savings when you're not generating income. You don't have a path forward to generate income. Then we say, well, as long as if you're planning to be a sort of a perpetual ani because you don't have a financial plan, then you cannot accept tzedakah until you exhaust your savings. But if you're planning to generate income and you need a certain amount of money to generate income, you would qualify as an ani if you need to get money in order to accumulate to be able to generate income. And that's the bottom line. But he said that, remember, he said above, if a person is collecting tzedakah, if a person is generating income because he's gainfully employed, he is not allowed to take from the tzedakah fund. We'll have to